Production of Speak Your Mind is made possible by the Human Development Center. Professional, compassionate, dedicated. Learn more at www.humandevelopmentcenter.org. Additional support provided by Vessel Construction of Duluth.
Resiliency training has been embraced by the U.S. military as an effective tool to help service members face challenges and bounce back from adversity. But this isn't just for military personnel. We can all use the skills taught by this program. It's a mental health boot camp next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. We all face challenges and setbacks in life that can be hard to overcome, but there are ways to prepare ourselves to be more resilient. Tonight, our experts share tips from their resiliency training program. Tip number 1, you don't have to be in the military to benefit from these skills. So call the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. And you can also text us your questions or email them using the number or address listed at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we're going to be taking your questions during our entire show, so get calling now. And of course, we're going to start by introducing our guest. Major Richard Brumman serves in the Minnesota National Guard as the Resilience Risk Reduction and Suicide Prevention Program Manager. That is a mouthful, I got to tell you. Staff Sergeant T.J. Smith serves in the Minnesota Army National Guard as a Master Resilience Trainer, and Major Danelle Jones serves with the Minnesota Army National Guard and works with us at the Human Development Center. Thanks to all of you for coming here tonight, and especially to you, Major Brumman, because you had a bit of a drive down from the cities to get here, so we really appreciate that. And I think a really good place for us to start would be just by telling us and our viewing audience about why the military was interested in a resiliency training program.
Well, thank you for having me today or tonight. I'll start by saying that, you know, as a military, when we're faced with problems or when we're faced with issues, part of our mantra is just to do a hard look at what is the problem and then try to apply the skills and the fixes to that problem. And clearly, Time Magazine, any news source, anywhere you look, there's an issue with suicide, both in the military and in the civilian world. The military, we adopted a program, and specifically tonight we're talking about the resilience program. It's really, when we look at our suicide population, or our population that's at risk of suicide, it's a very small segment of our population, but yet the entire force can benefit from this immunization from some of the stressors that might lead to that.
And I think, you know, what I love about this program is I did my residency at a VA medical center, and the military has been leaders in treating post-traumatic stress disorder, really, in developing programs for post-traumatic stress disorder, for not just for the military personnel, but for civilians as well. And for me, when I was reading about the resilience training program this week, I really saw this effort as, instead of playing just only cleanup after combat, this is getting more at the front end of things, right?
Yes. It's a very proactive approach to prevention of any of the things. I think one of the best statements that I've heard about the program in general is basically we're trying to prevent them from going to that dark spot of, you know, suicide or being more at risk and doing more risky behaviors like drug use or financial strain and that kind of thing. So the military is definitely just taking a very proactive approach to the entire issue.
And also, we just think that these are not just skills that when the military personnel are learning these skills, you don't just apply them to your military life, you apply them to the rest of your life as well.
For me, when I train soldiers on these skills, whether they have just gotten back from deployment or whether they're a brand new soldier to the Minnesota National Guard, they often tell me that they are learning way more about their personal lives and how they can, you know, strengthen their relationships at home than they are actually about the military. And I think that's a key thing because, we're not just soldiers. We do have our personal lives as well. And that's true in the Minnesota National Guard, or even if you're active duty, you have your home life. And so these skills, they translate very, very well from the military to the civilian world as well.
And so let's just get everybody on the same page. And what's a good definition of resilience, Major Brumman?
I would say resilience gives you that capability to bounce back when a stressful event happens. And it's not only that, and Staff Sergeant Smith can elaborate more on this, but there's many different aspects of why we do resilience training. One of the largest stressors for all of us is relationships, and our relationships with our spouse, with our children, with employers. And there's an element of resilience training that helps strengthen those relationships. For example, I use it with my children more than I use it with other military folks. There's active constructive responding. And so when my 5-year-old comes up with something that I've been in the cities, I've been struggling with traffic for an hour and I get home. And he's super excited to tell me about something, and that I should feel honored, and I do feel honored that he wants to tell me that and he wants to share that with me. But the tendency after being in traffic, I could have just blow that off and then really affect that relationship.
A barrier to active constructive responding,
Absolutely.
right? Being frustrated in traffic.
And when you're tired and frustrated, it's easier to have those barriers, but it takes an effort, and that's what we talk a lot about in resilience. You kind of get out of it what you put into it. But for instance, for him, he comes and tells me about something that he saw, a frog in the front yard, and I could say, well, that's great, frogs live in the front yard, but instead,
which would be passive constructive responding. So,
Absolutely.
So it's positive, but it's not really enthusiastic that way.
Right.
And a better way would be
to make an active constructive, where identifying what he's excited about and not being cheerleadery and not being overexcited or putting overemphasis, but acknowledging what he's excited about and asking about it, bringing more into the why he brought that to me to begin with, and then just really enhancing that experience in general.
Really taking an interest and in that way showing your enthusiasm. Okay, everybody, so you just heard about skill number 1, active constructive responding. I had a little brain fart there. I don't know if I'm allowed to say fart on TV, but I've already said it. So
Can I add on to what he was just saying?
Yes, please.
One thing that I always stress to my soldiers when we're talking about active constructive response is to remember that when somebody is sharing good news with you, out of anybody else in the world, there's, obviously there's a lot of people in our world, but out of anybody else in the world, they chose you. And they chose you for a very specific reason. They value you, they value your relationship, they value your advice, they value you as a person. And oftentimes we just take those relationships for granted because, especially with our families, we think, well, they're going to be here tomorrow. So if I just play this one off so I can just have my 5 minutes where I'm mad about this traffic, it's going to be okay. But why not, take the little extra effort and relive that positive experience with that person and strengthen that relationship. And the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Well, and I love the way that you put that too, that whole notion of if I think about it that they chose me, that makes me feel special, and then I want to then make them feel special, right, in that by listening in that active constructive way. So that's one of the relationship skills that's taught in the relationship module. It's a 4-module program, the Master Resilience Training. And I know another one of the relationship skills is praise, offering praise. And talk a little bit about the role of praise, particularly because I think a lot of civilians don't necessarily associate praise with the military as well. And especially, when you think of what is shown in the movies about sergeants, and praise is not the word that comes to, I think, most people's minds out there. But we're going to do some myth busting tonight. Danelle, talk about.
Yeah, I think the praise, for some of us that have been in for a while, it was a little hard, kind of a culture shock to be like, really? But I've become a believer in it because I've watched some of the younger soldiers under me that I lead really respond well to it. As far as praise goes, we call it hunting for the good too, and that comes from them finding the good things in their life. And one effective thing that I see with one of our resiliency trainers in my unit is they go around at the end of each day and talk about what one good thing that they did. And to watch the young soldiers really respond to that and say that they're hunting for that one thing, that great thing that they did and that accomplishment, and they like to share that at the end of the day. And sometimes if if the sergeant in charge of them doesn't do that with them, they'll remind them, hey, we got to do the hunt for the good tonight, you know, and so they really respond well to it. And I think what it does is it really just trains their mind to not just focus on some of the, you know, some of the just monotonous tasks that we do in the military, or the things that maybe they're not doing as well, but it also helps them understand some of the good things that they're doing. And it gives the leader a chance to connect with them and praise them as well and share their experience.
And I think that there's a specific way that praise is taught also. It's not just saying good job, right?
Yeah, it's we call it effective praise, and and you're right on the money when you say that most people don't think of praise as being in the military, because we are really, really good at criticism, and there's a difference between, you know, bad criticism and effective criticism, and we train our leaders when we're criticizing our soldiers to identify what it was that they did wrong. And tell them what it was that they did wrong so they can not do that wrong thing in the future. Well, effective praise is kind of the same thing. It's identifying the strategy that enabled the person to do the good thing so they can do that good thing in the future. And, you know, the example that I always use is, you know, say you're at your son's baseball game and he hits a home run. So you're very proud that he hit this home run. And it's very easy to say, hey, you hit a home run, good job, I'm proud of you, and leave it at that. Well, just adding another sentence of, hey, you kept your eye on the ball, you know, swung through the pitch, and you kept your elbow in. That enabled you to hit that good run, or that home run. Good job. And so you just added a little bit of information that child can now use again in the future to hit more home runs. And so in the military, we try to get our leaders to do the same thing of identifying what it was that was good, and what that does, it enables winning streaks, so they can continue to do good things over and over and over again.
And it brings that self-awareness to, I didn't just do a good job, but here is the specific thing that I did. And I know self-awareness is part of the resilience, the core resilience skills that are taught as well. And so it's tying that in. And we also know that when, you know, from the psychology end of things, we know that people learn better when they're not afraid, and they learn better when they're in a positive mood. And so that also speaks to, you want to reinforce the good.
Yeah,
right?
and I think what we're doing when we talk about effective praise is we're kind of dispelling the myth that you only learn from your mistakes, and we're letting people understand that you can learn from your successes. You can learn from positive events. And it just literally takes an extra sentence when you're dealing with, you know, either your subordinates or even your own children, by just telling them what it is that made them do that good thing.
And I think once they realize that part of that is the performance enhancing part of that, like you said, people learn better, they perform better when you have this this environment. And so obviously we're in the business of performance, and so when we perform better, that's good, and the leadership kind of is recognizing that now.
And we also know that the nuts and bolts of being in battle and combat is, you know, a lot of reasons why do I stay and fight because the person next to me stays and fights, but because I respect my commanding officer, and if I can have that positive relationship with you, if you're my commanding officer, I can have that positive relationship with you. I'm going to do more for you, and I'm going to want to do it the best that I can.
Absolutely.
And then we can see how it's like, why wouldn't the rest of the world want these same skills too? Because we don't necessarily call them commanding officers in the civilian world. We might call them chief executive officers, or we call them bosses, or we call them mom and dad, right? Yep. That these all are transferable skills. Let's talk about a few components of resilience, the importance of optimism in resilience.
Well, like you said before, I mean, when you feel good, I think, you know, things different happen. The example I used with my son, if, you know, just that cognitive shift and that active shift of taking the actions to make that situation better, the ripple effects are magnifying. So I took that simple event, he responded back to me, that made me feel better. I reciprocated that feeling better back to him, so that just the rest of the night was a totally different scenario than it could have been. And you know, that's the biggest piece of resilience too, is that nobody is just an optimistic person just because they choose to be. It takes action. It takes those applying that skill and using, you know.
So that's a really good point, because again, I think a lot of us think about people as being pessimistic or being optimistic or being somewhere in the middle, as if you're born that way, and can't learn how to be either different if you're pessimistic by nature, that it's by nature and that you can't learn to be different. Tell us a little bit about how you teach somebody optimism.
The biggest thing that we do is we teach them to hunt the good stuff. And hunt the good stuff is you try to find 3 good things every day that happen to you, and you reflect upon them and think about, why did this good thing happen? How did I contribute to this good thing? And how did others contribute to this good thing? And I remember when I went through the Master Resilience Training course, I was at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. And for homework each night, we had to find 3 good things. Well, I don't know if you've ever been to Fort McCoy, but there's not many good things that go on at Fort McCoy. And so I sat there and I thought about it, I'm like, really? And it was really tough. But every day I looked for the good things. And some days my good thing was they had biscuits and gravy at breakfast, because really, who doesn't like biscuits and gravy? And I had to think about that of what does this mean to me? And now that I've done it so much, I don't necessarily journal it, but every day I sit down and I think about the good things that have happened each day. And it really does mean the difference of either having a bad day or having a really great day. A great example is I was going down to the Twin Cities and was going to teach some resilience training to soldiers just returned from Afghanistan. And I'm in the shower, and there's hardly any water pressure in the shower, and I'm trying to get the soap out of what little hair I have, and it's just not really working, and I'm already kind of crabby, and I had to stop for a second and think, well, at least I have running water. And that was the one thing that turned my day around, because I could have let that experience of not having water pressure ruin my entire day, but I thought of it differently in a more optimistic way. I hunted for that good thing, and it totally turned my day around.
And so what we also know is that there's an element of gratitude also that goes along with this, right, Major Jones? And talk about kind of how gratitude and optimism come together there.
Well, I think both of them, as far as creating more resiliency in a person, I think it goes back to the basic human need of a sense of control and a sense of identity and connectedness that we all as humans have. And so those 2 things add to that. When you're optimistic, you're going to find some of the things that you can control more easily than, you can't control the water pressure, but being able to be more positive and react to that is the thing that you control, and I think that helps.
And we also know that people who tend to see their environment as controllable feel more optimistic, and that can be true even if we're in an environment that on the surface doesn't look like it's very, very controllable, right?
That's right. And so I think, those 2 things help you not only find the good things, but also help, have more perception and realize how much control you do have in your current environment. And some of the things that you do and don't control come into play there as well. So it is one thing, both of those that I use with my own kids as well, to build their own resiliency. I'm a big fan of resiliency for children, because I think that this is a world that they need to be able to deal with adversity. And so one of the big things, going back to hunting to the good things, that I do with my 5-year-old every night, I ask her what was her favorite part of her day, and in response I tell her what my favorite thing about her is. And I think it's just a really great way of relating and having that connection with her, but giving her a positive sense of self, and that's part of that resiliency that you get out of optimism and looking for the good every day.
So here are 2 more skills that we found: hunting for the good and being grateful, as skills that can teach you how to be optimistic and move you from always seeing the negative, which is really easy for us to do in the world. It's easy for us to get focused on the negative and moving away to that. Mental toughness, let's talk a little bit about mental toughness. Some of the mental toughness skills, Major Brumman.
I'll defer.
All right. For me, the biggest one is going to be put it in perspective. And what put it in perspective, what we're talking about there is we're ending catastrophic thinking, and that's thinking where you have one bad thought, and then that leads to another bad thought, and leads to another bad thought, and in the worst case scenario ends up leading to suicide. And catastrophic thinkers, when we talk about the catastrophic thinking and the thoughts that they have, oftentimes people kind of laugh in class, because it'll go from you lost your job to I'm going to be dead in a ditch next week. And we kind of laugh about it, like nobody's really going to think about that or think like that. But the reality is people do think like that. And people who are catastrophizing, those thoughts are very real to them. And so with put it in perspective, it's a skill that we teach where it helps you pump the brakes and have some self-awareness that, hey, I'm catastrophizing right now, and then the self-regulation to kind of do something about it. And first we start thinking about the worst case scenario thoughts, and we list them all out and go all the way to the last thought that you have, which sometimes is death. And one of the reasons we have everybody write it down is it kind of gets them to start realizing, like, okay, I lost my job, but it's really not going to lead to me being dead. So now they're kind of laughing about it a little bit. Well, then we switch to the best case scenario. What's the best thing that could happen? And on this one, you want to go crazy with it. And most people end up, writing down that they're going to be president and then ruler of the world and, be rich and famous. And then once you're done with the best case scenario, then you write down the most likely outcomes. And that enables that person to stop catastrophizing and really look at the real situation and then, move forward with action that is going to benefit them, because obviously if they're catastrophizing, thinking that they're going to die next week, they're never going to move forward with anything.
Well, and I think that whole notion of catastrophe is that I am facing a situation that is beyond my ability to cope, right? And people feel overwhelmed. When people feel overwhelmed, they tend to feel trapped, and it's actually that feeling of trappedness that leads to suicidal thinking, not necessarily. Most people who have suicidal thoughts don't really want to die, but they feel trapped in their situation. So that's how catastrophic thinking then plays that negative role in leading to bad outcomes. And if you can see that, wait a minute, if you can be more realistic about what your situation is and have some sense of control over that, then let's start talking a little bit about character strength and the role of character strength in resilience.
I think the big piece in character strength is, one is identifying, taking a survey, figuring out what your character I thought I knew what my character strengths were, but once I took a survey and really they're lined out for me, it made a lot of sense. And once, especially as an organization, when we can take character strengths and we know other people's character strengths too, as far as working as a team, you can identify people's strengths. So in that team, if I don't have
and everyone who's coming into the military, participating in this, one of the first things you have to do is do this questionnaire, this assessment of your character strengths, right?
Right. And so you can really highlight somebody's character strengths and really bolster a team, or individually you can identify what your character strengths are, and that just helps you with the self-regulation and self-identification.
And Sergeant Smith, so you're sitting down to take this. Before you took your own assessment of your character strengths, what did you think your character strengths were going to be?
I did a lot of self-reflection and just kind of ended up confusing myself a little more. Mm-hmm. And then one of the ones that I thought was going to be higher was leadership, because I thought I was a pretty good leader. And leadership wasn't the highest on my list. And I do know that self-regulation was going to be on the bottom of my list, and I found out that it is on the bottom of my list. I can't go to a gas station without buying a candy bar. I have to have a candy bar. I can't self-regulate my sweet tooth. But what it enabled me to do is really see where they were. And what we do is we identify our top 5 signature character strengths, and those are the ones that you use without even thinking about it. They're just they're second nature. And then what we teach.
So for you, what were those? Because you were gracious enough to say, "Oh, I wasn't the great leader I thought I was going to be." And so, but what were your character strengths?
Honesty was number 1. Number 2 was bravery. And then oh man, it's been a while since I looked at my signature strengths. To remember
that's okay. Honesty and bravery. If you were my sergeant, I would take that.
Well, thank you.
I'd feel good about that. Mm-hmm. But I love that notion that how we think we are is not necessarily what the character strengths assessment shows. And so you get feedback and information that tells you how do you use this character strengths, Major Jones, with that concept of resilience. Tell us how that fits in.
Well, I think you become a lot more mindful of who you are, and you have that self-identity, and you're able to, just be more aware of some of the things that, and appreciate that about yourself, and we all, no matter if you're in the military or civilian side, we all play to our strengths, and sometimes tend to shy away from some of our weaknesses. At the same time, sometimes thinking that we're a great leader, and maybe that didn't show up, but at the same time just trying to challenge ourselves too. So you can use that assessment and just building that self-awareness and building that positive self-identity, like, yes, I am a very brave person, and I'm very honest, and I think that you can value that about yourself.
And then also, wouldn't it be, Major Brumman, about bringing those skills that are your character strengths and saying, how can I apply these character strengths to this really tough situation then in front of me?
Absolutely. It's about that, and as well, we're in an organization, and everybody, we work as a team, we work in relationships, and so if you're in a tough situation, you can identify those skills and those strengths that maybe you don't have, and you recognize that you don't have them, and you can turn and depend on someone else that has them.
But then a big thing too is also working on the ones that are lower on your list,
right.
Working on bringing them up, and then knowing that it's not that they're not there, it's just that you might have to put forth a little more effort to actually use those strengths. And so being able to identify in a certain situation, okay, my top signature strengths, they're not helping me right now. What strength can I use? Oh, I need to reach down a little bit more. I need to dig deeper and use the strength that I do have. It's just lower on my list. So, I get, majors, not to pick on the majors, but majors and captains and first sergeants that all the time are like, this is, I hate this survey because I know I'm a good leader and leadership is number 15. And it's not that you're not a good leader. It's just that it's something that you have to actively work on. It doesn't come natural to you. And so it's all about knowing when to reach down and grab on the strengths that are going to benefit you at the time.
And I think the other thing that does is that it gives us feedback about if we are going around thinking this is my number one strength and it's not, you're not going to work as hard on it then, because you're thinking like, I'm really good at this, I don't need to put my energy into that. If you get the feedback that, well, maybe you're not as hot as you think you are on that, instead of being defensive, a different response is to be motivated to address that then as a weakness and help get it maybe up the scale a little bit.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so, as we're talking about this, it also seems to me that all of this resilience program is not just about addressing of preparing soldiers, certainly preparing soldiers for, you can see how it would prepare soldiers for combat, that's an adverse situation, but also giving people the personal strengths that then is going down to obviously address and reduce this suicide risk, right, which is the most adverse.
I would absolutely agree. That's probably the most severe adverse reaction. And what we talked about before is that we can, the same reason everybody gets a flu shot. We're all exposed to the level of stress and how we deal with that. We give resilience training to provide those skills and those strengths to prevent getting down to that
Mental
level.
health boot camp it's the psychological version of vaccination for the flu then. I love it, and I love that the military is doing this. We are absolutely out of time now. Thanks so much for all of you for being here, and I think all of you would agree with me that whatever Staff Sergeant Smith's leadership rank was when he first started out, I don't think it's down there anymore. I think it's kind of raised to the top, don't you?
Well, thank you.
Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links and read my blog, the place where I answer more of your questions. And you can also email us your questions about next week's show, when we'll be talking about stress reduction and self-care, kind of related. Do you see how we did this? So you're going to want to tune in. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.